Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Ben Data, co-chair of DSW. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of Denver Startup Week. This community has been the catalyst for lots of change over the past decade, and this week we're coming together to celebrate the past and dream big for the future. We are able to bring Denver Startup Week to this community thanks to our 2021 sponsors. Thank you to our HQ and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors, whose leadership makes this week come to life. Capital One Cafe, Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork. And our track sponsors, who have made all of the great content you're hearing today possible. Founder Track, Kickstart, Growth Track, Friday Health Plans, Developer Track, Quizlet, Product Track, Palantir, Designer Track, Battery 621 in the Public Works, People Track, Exactly, and Spotlight Event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to B-Side Fund, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing Company, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, Gusto, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pine Insurance, Promontory MortgagePath, Red Bull Basement, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Please say thank you to these companies as you enjoy our hybrid Denver Startup Week. And don't forget to use hashtag #DenStartupWeek to share your experience and moments of inspiration on social media. Have a great week.
Early risers, all-nighters, slow pours, fast crams, post-nap, on the mat, in the stacks, phone down, volume up, complete silence. You ups? Coffee cups, pizza crusts, first semester, fourth quarter, focus 100, privacy 0, pre-test, one last check, let's go. However you study, Quizlet takes the guesswork out of your coursework. Learn it, own it, Quizlet.
Hello everyone, welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Connor Swanson, the Developer Track co-chair along with Aaron Clark and member of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee. Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary of Denver Startup Week. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, or sexual orientation. A special thank you to all of our sponsors for their support in helping us to keep DSW free and accessible for all. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.
Hello, everyone. I'm Danielle Bonos from Master Manager at Promontory MortgagePath, and I'm very excited to welcome all of you to this session on fostering equity and inclusion on technical teams. For those of you who don't know us, Promontory MortgagePath is a Denver-based fintech startup, and we're on a mission to fundamentally change the way community lenders approach their mortgage businesses. We're leveraging tech to engineer a faster, simpler, and more inclusive mortgage process. We're a fast-growing team, and we have added well over 100 Denver-based and remote members to our team. If you're seeking an environment dedicated to personal and professional success, and you weren't able to connect with us at yesterday's career fair, please check out our career page on our website or on LinkedIn. We're very grateful to have this opportunity to partner with the Denver Startup Week and to support Denver's thriving and diverse entrepreneur network. And we're especially proud to sponsor the Stronger Together event series. Before we dive in, I'd like to thank all of you who are engaging with us in this celebration of the diverse landscape of women-owned and led businesses throughout Colorado and the many organizations that support them. I'm personally, I'm incredibly honored and humbled to introduce our formidable panelists, Jenn Knight of AgentSync and Zari Zahra of Spekit. And with that, I hope you're all ready to get inspired, and please enjoy the session.
Thanks, Danielle. So I'm Jenn Knight, co-founder and CTO of AgentSync. We work in insurance space, doing regulatory compliance software for carriers, agencies, and MGAs. Some of those words are recognizable to a lot of you, some of them are not. We like to talk about distribution management, which is a very niche term, but needless to say, we're helping tackle some of the fun back office edges of a really great but old industry, and having a lot of fun doing it. Moved out to Denver last year from San Francisco. So this is a something Zari and I have in common, which is a Bay Area based startup. We realized that Denver was going to be a really fantastic place to grow our company. So wanted to actually start, we're going to talk through today. I'm going to be actually peppering Zari with a bunch of questions about this particular topic, which we're really excited to talk about together. But maybe want to start, Zari, if you could give me a little bit about Spekit, your role, how you came to found it, and how you ended up as the head of R&D of a great company here in Denver.
Absolutely. So my co-founder, Mel, actually is sort of kind of from there. Her maternal side is all based here. She went to Boulder. So there was a little bit of a family connect, but like you, Jen, Spekit, which is a digital enablement platform, think of it as an intelligent layer of contextual bite-sized knowledge that helps you in your workflow as an employee. So we layer on top of all the major SaaS applications. And when we started Spekit, we were out in San Francisco. That's where we met. That's where we were working together, had this idea, started testing it, throwing stuff at the wall. It spiraled, sort of took a life of its own into what is now Spekit. But we knew early on, both of us, that we wanted to be in a place where we could easily find talent that could scale. And frankly, we also, on a personal level, both of us really wanted a place where we would have a lot more diversity, which is interesting to say. San Francisco is pretty diverse, but maybe not so much in terms of lifestyle and professions. It's very tech heavy. And one of the great things about Denver is I feel like people here have a much better work-life balance. So that was always super attractive to both of us because that's something we really like to champion at Spekit.
Yeah, maybe that actually will tee up. We're going to go through a little bit of kind of what does diversity mean to us? What are we seeing as opportunities there, challenges, and how we're tackling it as organizations? So to give you a little preview of this, and then we'll be saving some time at the end for Q&A. But you teed it up really well there, Zari, about moving to Denver and thinking about the ethos that you wanted to bring to your company, you and Mel, when you were starting it. And I would love to hear what diversity means to you. I think there's the way that we have, air quotes, traditionally thought about it. You and I are diverse founders, but there's diversity in many different levels and brings many different perspectives. By
the way, this questioning is going to swap. It's going to switch real cool. It's not going to be a one way. Jenn Knight. But to answer your question, diversity, and we were talking about this when we were prepping for this, everyone, but there's gender, there's race, ethnicity, their sexual orientation, but then there's other elements that are becoming to light more and more recently, which frankly haven't really been talked about. Mental health being one huge part of it, health in general through the pandemic. I just went through a 2-week spurt where both my parents got COVID. They're totally vaccinated, but still they had symptoms and they had to be handled and all those things. Work-life balance, juggling work in a remote environment, and just like diversity of age and thought. I think all of those count as diversity, and specifically with Spekit, because we have a global team. I'm originally from Pakistan, and we have a bunch of people out in Karachi and in Pakistan working for us. And in Pakistan, the diversity isn't so much ethno-religious. It can be, but it's 99% Muslim or some 95%. So really, the diversity that we're trying to strive for here is getting more women into STEM. And it's not that they don't have the degrees, they do, but for some reason they end up going more towards QA than towards mainstream engineering. And so, and QA is STEM too, but we always struggle with getting more female engineers locally in Pakistan. So that's, so what diversity, I guess, means can vary based on geography, for sure. May not always just be women of color, all the things. But I don't know, what do you think? I'd be curious because we had different perspectives.
Well, I think it's a fascinating. I love that the conversation is actually evolving to be more engaged with what the reality of diverse perspectives means, and it's something that we think a lot about. So we are very niche in the insurance space, and probably not shocking, myself and my co-founder Niji don't have 30 years of experience in insurance, but those perspectives and that people coming from that part of the industry are absolutely critical for us growing as an organization. And it's really cemented in this idea that You don't have to have this traditional background of, I've worked in tech, I've worked at these companies, I've worked at these schools to get these degrees, to bring really, really impactful perspectives. So diversity for us from the start has been about career. Actually, where were you before? How does that inform where you're going? Do you have to be in tech to work with us? Absolutely not. Can you bring a really amazing perspective that'll help move our product forward without that? Absolutely. We're loving a lot of folks who are coming from, maybe they did 10 years of a career in something completely different than tech, and they're coming in and they're bringing this really real world perspective of what is it like to operate? What is it like to engage with a product? How do you think about customers in a different way? And they complement each other. So we have a more complemented team. So we have definitely thought about this as not just, okay, we have a woman co-founder. That's great. That's a piece of the puzzle. But I also am not diverse in many of the aspects of my background. I spent the last long time, over a decade, in the Valley, doing a very specific set of activities at companies that look pretty similar. And so just my gender alone doesn't, make me bring a different perspective necessarily. There's a lot of experiences that can drive that. And that's how we've been kind of evolving it as our company has grown, which has been a lot of fun. And I think, Spekit has a lot too in that space of, there's these perspectives that you need of users, and how do you think about consumption of information and consumption of support that maybe someone in the tech world is really well suited to, and then maybe someone who's actually experienced in a different way can bring a really cool perspective.
I think before we carry on, one thing I'd love to hear from you, and I think you've already sort of started going into it, is why are we here? Why does it matter? Now, we all know why it matters on a personal level, right? But I often find myself repeating and sounding like a broken record about how this is not just something we need to do to feel good about ourselves and our values, although not saying that's not important. That is very important. But in addition to that, this is good business. And I'd love to hear more of your perspective on that and what you've learned.
Yeah, it's a great question. So for us, it's essential for our business that we think beyond what would be maybe these traditional perspectives, because we're going into a part of the industry where we need expertise, and that expertise hasn't had the opportunity necessarily to work at a company like ours. So if we weren't willing to say, hey, let's take your expertise and marry it with technology, it wouldn't work. We also really need curious, open, creative mindsets of people who are willing to challenge, push boundaries, approach problems differently, who aren't from insurance, but need to be able to be open to hearing what the real pain points are, and then think about how to solve them. And I think for us as a good business perspective, what I found from my teams in my prior life is that bringing people from different backgrounds who speak with different voices helps you actually surface all of the different challenges you're going to have, and gives you a better representation of the customer experience. It helps you see the gotchas early on. I can definitely get into a room and, maybe the goal isn't always to get everyone to a yes, right? This idea of, oh, we all agreed can be great. It also can be really dangerous. And so having that space where we can actively disagree, bring different perspectives and work through them is really, really powerful. It also, you touched on this a bit with health and some of the mental health. And I think there's a lot about, how do I see the world? How do you see the world? How am I experiencing something? How are you experiencing something? And being able to vocalize those, and then bring that idea of, oh, I never realized that you're experiencing it that way. I never realized that the way that I was thinking about this is actually biased by my experience, and have a community of people who can bring that to bear is really powerful, whether that actually is expressed in the product itself or just also in the organization of what are we doing as a process? How are we presenting ourselves together as a team? And I think all of that comes together in product and engineering, but also just as an organization of how are you operating and how are you improving? And so that's how we thought a lot about that advantage. And from a Spekit perspective, what's it meant for you?
Well, all the things you said, and very honestly, when you think about R&D, when you think about STEM, it is at its very, very, very core. The best companies that do it really well are innovative. Mm-hmm. And now, in order to be innovative, you can't be a giant echo chamber of all the same thoughts and all the same, voices and perspectives. And so I think our global diversity makes us more innovative. I think the fact that we have people from different backgrounds, to your point, different industries chiming in makes us more innovative. And I think there's something important to be said about empathy and its role, especially for a product like ours, where there is such a huge end user component to what we're building, right? We're constantly in people's workflows, right? And that empathy is like, it's empathy with the end user is super important, because when we're designing solutions, we want to be sure that we're accounting for the widest common, common denominator of end users. Honestly, like, we know it's sort of like meditation. I know by the data that if I meditate regularly, I will have X% increase in my focus and my mental well-being. It's similar to that, where like there's just data after data that shows that gender diverse exec teams, what was it, that McKinsey report, they outperform by 21%, right? So ethnic diversity also makes you outperform by like 30%. That's like a lot. And similarly, like in terms of employee expectations, I think people are, especially when you talk about millennials and Gen Z, I think like there is a big element of talent retention and being able to attract the best talent is being diverse, right? Because you may actually be turning off or putting off people if you don't have like a culture that supports it and that is welcoming. Because I do think, especially in the wake of the pandemic, you guys see this on LinkedIn. It's like the great resignation, right? Yep. Especially after the pandemic, people have really there's a big shift of priorities. And like, if you don't truly like your job, there's a bunch of options right now, right, for you to walk out. And liking your job and feeling compelled and like compelled to come into work every day, feeling welcome, feeling included, it's a huge part of being motivated. I mean, I've been there myself personally, where I've been at a place, and we were sharing this earlier, been at a prior role at a larger company where I was reporting to 3 levels of white male Chris. I'm referring to Chris, who was referring to Chris, who was referring to Chris. All great product people. But there was an element of me at some point that felt that not being a Valley bro was a disadvantage, right? Yeah. Which it shouldn't be. So that's another huge point that I think people don't really talk about, especially in the Valley. It's like, if everyone is between the ages of 25 and 35, 40, and single without kids, and that is the culture that evolves, as like going to the bar after work. Not saying there's anything wrong with that. There's a whole slew of people who are, it's including tons of people on our team currently, that can't do that because they have to go pick up their kids, right? So that's another kind of diversity and inclusion that we don't even like consider as inclusion. That's not to say you don't do that. It's just that, how do we make sure that that doesn't actually reflect itself in how actual managers and people are evaluating performance, right? And are evaluating the quality of the work. And I think it just needs to be top of mind, because if we're not conscious of it, we'll fall back to the default, and the default is biased. Even for us, it's biased. It's social conditioning.
We're not immune to it. Just because we've been in those structures doesn't mean that we wouldn't unintentionally create those structures too, right? I think that's also part of this. Is it has to be a constant dialogue. We know that there have been challenges in the past. We know that there continue to be challenges today. There have been situations that I've been in as well, where you're the only person in the room. You don't have your voice heard, or you have your voice taken from you also, which is a phenomena that I think a lot of us have experienced, where suddenly you hear your words coming out of someone else's mouth and they're received by that other, from that other person, and not received from you. But it isn't a solve of just having us be here if we're not having a conversation about whether we're doing it right. Or
have you been mansplained to? Have you been mansplained to, Jen?
Recently, this is I think goes to the, we're here, but does it get better? And I was sharing with Zari that I very recently had a conversation in which a very basic technical aspect was explained to me as though I had never heard of the concept, though I am the CTO and co-founder of a successful startup. So the phenomenon does not end just when you get a title or when you found your own company. It comes in its own expressions. We kind of have to constantly be combating it, which I think is a fair statement. I'm curious, there are the studies, and I think when we hear numbers, it's like, okay, so the teams perform better. Like, what does that mean? Coming into Spekit for you and Mel and building your leadership team. Have you had a moment where you're like, this is one of those moments where this is why we're better, why we're better together? I'm just curious if you have one that maybe is top of mind, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit of, I think numbers can feel very great. Okay, Zari, Jenn, like, we're going to perform 10% bet 50. What does that mean?
Like me and my meditation practice. I know the numbers, but I really have to feel it to commit to it. I think at Spekit, the one thing that Mel does really well, and I like to think I do an okay job at it too, is not trying not to fall into this stereotypical perception of leadership as being one-to-one with conventionally male attributes, like being aggressive, being being very stoic and very emotionally controlled and all that. And I think that one thing that I like to think we bring to our team is a sense of vulnerability. When we mess up, we fess up, and that happens a lot in startups. So I do think that has helped our team also be able to mess up and fess up and really be open and vulnerable about things things that are going on in their personal lives that impact them, things that might be going on in interpersonal relationships at work that impact them, and that not being that not reflecting as a negative, but rather like a positive way to address the issue, bring it to the forefront and resolve it. So I do think that at a very baseline level, I think has been something that has actually led to, I like to think, a much more positive culture in general at Spekit, where people can just be vulnerable. And I think that's super important to them feeling safe. And if they don't feel safe, they don't want to come into work every day. You don't want a culture where at Sunday night, people are getting the Monday blues, right? They're like, oh, I'm going to go into work and I'm going to be shat on, or and nobody's supporting my growth. And so I do think that's the one example that comes to mind. But what about you?
That one resonates a ton with me. I think as maybe the first woman of the leadership team with my partner, thinking about how to talk about that vulnerable space, where we're succeeding, where we're having challenges, and keeping that as part of the dialogue from early on. And I think part of the diversity of leadership teams is having a team that's willing to have different perspectives, talk about those different perspectives, and come to a conclusion together as a model for an organization is really powerful. We're not always going to agree. And it's not about, biggest ego in the room. It's not about who's screaming the loudest. It's not about shutting people out. It's hey, we all come from different places. We all are going to bring different perspectives. Can we talk about it? Can we be vulnerable about it, as you said? And then can we talk about it with the team, or can we show that to the team of, I love your mess up, fess up, right? It's a startup. We're going to mess up. If we all thought we were some sort of superhero that was going to get it right every time, that's not really true. It's never true. There's always a cost to it. So that resonates a lot. I've been thinking a lot. And actually with one of the leaders on our team, we were talking last week about psychological safety, and they made a fantastic point of, I am not always doing things because I feel psychologically safe. Sometimes I'm doing things I'm not feeling safe, and I'm hoping that the outcome will be a safe one. And I that was one of those moments for me that was resonating of, it's always a conversation, right? I want to think about this, taking it back to our title, the new face of STEM. How do you foster these communities? It's actually by saying we've never won. There's no day where you declare, we have made it to complete and 100% psychological safety for everyone in the organization. It's a healthy respect for the fact that it is always going to be a process. You're always going to learn something new. And then if you can create a space where people can feel that if they kind of have that moment of courage and they can say it out loud, that they will get to a place of safety with that, but knowing that there's nothing that any of us can do, because we don't know every individual on the team, to guarantee safety all of the time, to have them come into the conversation that way. We can have them come out of the conversation that way if we build the right muscle. But that was something that was really, I loved, where I think about it, where I'm always learning something new. And that's what we're really striving for, is can we create a space where we're always learning something new from a team, where we can then help bring that broader perspective. But how that translates, once again, I'm like, how is that going to translate into our product? I can't draw this perfect line from here to there, although I think yours is a great one, which is we have to iterate together. We have to trust each other. And if there's trust and iteration, there will be better business outcomes from that. But that was one that's like top of mind for me. And I love the topic about psychological safety. I love that we can actually say it and talk about it as a team, and people aren't like, what are you talking about? Because I've been in orgs where it doesn't exist, or most of the conversations are, so I don't really feel safe, but I'm coming here every day anyway and trying to make it work. And that is taking up a really significant amount of my mind share. And you've experienced that. It's on, and I'm curious actually how much, as you were thinking about, the conversation with Mel, like, was there a part of you when you were starting this that was motivated by not being under 3 levels of Chris at that point in your career?
Being able to make my own mistakes. Yes, definitely. I think that was definitely a part of it. A part of it was seeing an opportunity and a problem that we felt passionately about. And by passionately, I mean, like, it annoys out of us, so that's a passion. Don't get me wrong. I think that what's really interesting to me is like how like there's a healthy balance of stress or like pressure, which I mean naturally exists in the startup, because it's do or die in a lot of situations, right? And there's always much larger players willing to chew you up, no matter what industry you're in, no matter how differentiated your product. I think that one important thing about psychological safety is, how do we create pockets of abundant thinking? This abundant is like this whole concept that we share with our sales team, etc. It's like, how do we get people to operate from a place of abundance and not from a place of scarcity? Because when you're operating from a place of scarcity, especially as product teams, especially in startups, you can really easily fall into the trap of just feature parity and being like a little feature factory and being like, oh, they have it, we need to have it. Otherwise, so it just spirals in and off itself. And I think that having a space where people can express themselves openly, no matter what their background or their education, for that matter, right, is super important for that as well. How do you do it though?
Yeah. Well,
how do you pull this off? How do you create a diverse technical team when, like, and I've recently had this in recruiting for an exec, is like, how do we do this ourselves when the pool that we're pulling from in terms of qualifications is rigged, more or less, just based on historic, just like the history of this issue.
Well, and I'm going to kick this back to, I am not going to answer.
I love how
on my own.
Big ticking bomb. There you go.
There you go. No, and as you and I talked about this, I think that the reality is it's hard work. I also would say that being in a position where you are a diverse founder, there is this expectation that suddenly you're going to have an easier time with it. You're going to just make it work. It's snap your fingers.
Magic wand.
Yeah. And as you highlighted, there's pipeline challenges with that. The one thing I loved, we brought head of talent and acquisition in early on. Her name is Lizzie, and she brought a wealth of experience in this space and said, hey, if you want to do this, you have to realize it takes time and very dedicated effort to actually see a diverse panel of candidates for every role. And that also means that you're going to go with the best candidate. So the pipeline problem does still perpetuate itself, but you have to recalibrate expectations, which is really, really hard on timing, especially with a startup. As you just said, it's sometimes do or die. Right? And so how do you say, okay, I have this do or die moment where I need to go close this gap for the organization because I have a greenfield opportunity. I have this way to move the business forward. And then I also need to spend twice or more than twice as long trying to fill this role because I really have to do the work to get that role filled. And so for us, it's been a constant dialogue of what are we targeting for from an organization? What are we looking at? What are our values? How are we living those values? And then how do we think about situations where we have to take that step and say like, okay, like part of this is it's going to take longer and it's going to be really, really, really hard. I loved this idea of, and we talked about this a little bit. So for me, I've thought about it a lot. I have a first child, my daughter, and I think about the experience that my grandmother had, my mom had versus me, versus what I hope my daughter will have. And I know that there is a multi-generational aspect of this, of people pushing in their generation, but that is very slow. So one thing that we have thought about a bit as a team is how do we think about what are kickstarts within a generation? And that is, and I'm stealing your phrase, Zari, but you handed me the question, how do we not do lazy filters? You know, how do we not think, oh, you worked at this company, you went to this school, that means you are good for this role? How do we open up the way that we think about sourcing? And we have people on the team, as I mentioned earlier, who came from different careers that are amazing members of the team. And in the historic way that you might source for these roles, they would not quote unquote qualify because they didn't check those certain boxes. So I think there's a multi-generational effort here about how do we improve from early education onwards, cultural norms around who's in a role. And then there have to be things that we're doing right now, including saying lazy filters go away. It can't be a lazy filter world. Let's think about sourcing from a diverse set of candidates today and accepting that people can change roles and be successful in STEM, air quotes, later in life, because they can, right? There's nothing about this part of the world that says that you have to have done X, Y, or Z in your 20s to be a fantastic contributing member of the team in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Like these are great perspectives we can bring if we're more open to that kind of culture extension and diversity of perspective. But what are you doing on your side?
Oh,
now that I stole your lazy filters, you know?
Lazy filters are just, yeah, they exist for a reason. They're signals, right?
Yeah.
But they're also otherwise known as biases, right? Full laden with presumptions. But what are we doing? First of all, I feel like it's important to be vocal about what you stand for, and I think it would be very hypocritical of Mel and I to ignore that part of our identities, both as women, as people of color, all of those things. And I think in the beginning, when we were very, very early on, Mel being earlier in her career, she would hesitate a little bit from speaking out on the topic of like some of the things we noticed when we were fundraising the first time, and just like the challenges we faced. And I think she warmed up to it a lot over time. And I think she's realized how inspirational that is, not just for her, but also for the other employees in the company. She's mentoring, she's running a session with the Colorado, with the school over at Boulder, to encourage diversity of career paths, or at least explaining different career paths to women at Boulder, CU Boulder, just because, you know, she was never exposed to those concepts growing up. So similarly, I think like one is owning it, and I think that is definitely a lot better now, post Me Too and all of that, to just own it. I tell this to Mel all the time. I'm like, there's a lot of disadvantages to being a woman. If once in a blue moon, there's a advantage to there being two of us, let's take it. And that's another thing, right? That's a classic female career data issue where women are not overselling themselves. They're not over buffering their resumes and whatnot. So what can we do? One, I think I like the fact that we try to own up to it and try to make sure, like, because it starts there. Once you say it out loud, I feel like we've had to hold ourselves accountable to that standard, to a higher standard. So very recently, we were looking for an exec, and it was very, very difficult to find someone who wasn't, a white gentleman from the Valley. But it took long. I think it took like twice or thrice as long, and it was painful. Yeah. But that's not to say we weren't filtering for talent along the way and weren't also looking at the best candidate for the job. It's just we were being intentional about making sure our pipeline was diverse. Mm-hmm. And just that forcing factor of being intentional to get the pipeline diverse was the challenging part. Not specifically, we need a woman, we need a person of color. Just even having a pool that includes diversity was the challenging part, and what took longer. And I think that pain of not having a gap in the company that is, filled was part of the cost we had to bear there. I think one other thing that our VP of Eng has recently championed that I was mentioning to you is like he's implementing radically simplified bands and leveling across R&D. And one of the big benefits of having one super transparent, super radical levels is that there's less negotiation, because we know that underrepresented groups negotiate less. So they always take a hit. And some of that delta is accounted for just by pure like leveling of the playing field. And especially in Boxon, where this kind of like radical simplicity of bands doesn't exist, for our Boxon team is very new. But I'm very excited to see it. And I'm very excited to see how that pans out. It's an experiment, but very excited to see how that pans out, especially in terms of making sure that no matter the profile outside of work of someone who works with us is they're all compensated equally. And so, yeah, those are just a few of the things we've done is like, again, hire recruiters who's very passionate about DE and I really helps. I wish I knew more ways to make this happen. So I'm all for ideas, and maybe that'd be a great place for Q&A as well. Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that you're highlighting, which I have appreciated about it, is you have to take almost every step of the process and appreciate that it could be and is likely introducing bias in ways that you may personally directly understand, or you may not, but it makes it for quite the journey, because a lot of the tools that are in the toolkit are not necessarily the most productive tools. And I love the one that you guys are thinking about with transparency and negotiating, right? There's a way that we've been told we should show up. There's a way that we've been told we should talk about our experience. And for each of us, we've been told something different. Women tend to downplay it. I'm not going to stretch. I'm not going to apply for a role that looks like it's too big for me. I'm not going to feel great coming into the room and thumping my chest about it. Some men, not all men, have been taught a different pattern there. Culturally, there's really different norms, right? And you're experiencing that with your team. But it's that constant exercise of saying, am I just implementing this and it's like the right thing to implement? Have I thought about it? Have I thought about the impact it could have? Is there a way for me to change it down from how am I posting jobs? How am I sourcing? Like, what is the language I'm using? What are the bands I'm creating? It's a lot of work, right? There's not a lot of, there's evolving patterns that are improving here, but it's an evolution for the entire community, not just people in the startup space.
And I think one of the things actually, as you were talking, I was thinking one of the things that Mel says that I think really speaks to this is how as a startup, there's a lot of things you're too young for. you're too young to worry about that, right? Yeah. I just feel, so she always says like, we're not too young to worry about this, because this is one of those problems like tech debt. If you have massive tech debt from the start, it's only going to mushroom from there. Yeah. And it's similar with diversity and inclusion. If the roots end up being really, really solid, it's going to be really hard to reverse and course correct later, right? Yeah. Like Mark Benioff in Salesforce having to do massive millions of dollars worth of correction for women who are being underpaid across all levels, right? And so I think that's an important thing that I think she always reminds us of. It's like, it's never too early for certain things that are core and fundamental to the growth of the business, the culture, and all the employees that, like I like to say, they give us the most precious thing that any human can give to any other human, which is your time. And because life is short, right? Yeah. And so I think that's just taking that seriously, I think is something that a lot of people just brush under a rug, along with other things that we'll do when we're older, you know?
When I grow up, I'll figure this out. When is it exactly that we all grow up? No, I love that. I think that is one of the things about startups that I also think is is that sort of biased idea. There's a whole bunch of different flavors of it, but we don't have to worry about that yet. We can operate this way because this is the way that successful startups in the past have gotten to where they are. And some of the things about that can be great from the products they produced, but some of the culture that it's created, we're all agreeing isn't the one that we want to spawn. So maybe we don't follow that. This is where we move fast and break things. Right? Do we want to move fast and break things? Do we want to break people in the process? Probably not. Some of us have gone through those processes where we got broken in the process. And if we're going to do better, we're going to do it when we're 4 people, 2 people, 4 people, 6 people, 8 people. There's no easy correction for anything, and especially not the people debt side of it. I think that's a great observation.
100%. Yeah. And the reputation is hard to reverse, right? Like, and really, when you think about your reputation as a company, honestly, I would say it's only been our focus on diversity and inclusivity has only been a positive for us in terms of recruiting, in terms of I've had multiple people who joined us who are phenomenal people, like resonate with that messaging and are hungry for that. And I don't just mean people who are themselves diverse. I would say people who would be cookie cutter, your typical white male alpha, like they also resonate and want to work in that kind of culture, because like we said, like the diversity comes from different perspective. There's health, there's life stage, there's just so many other things that make them diverse. You wouldn't even necessarily consider.
No, I was thinking this, we didn't talk about it too much, but I think in this space too, we talk about one, I think that what you just said is challenging assumptions, right? One of these things about diversity is I can't look at you and know. And I love, I that's one of the evolutions that I think is so important, is like, you can look at me and know certain things. I can know, I can project onto you certain things, but what do I actually know? And then appetite to learn and appetite to be in a group of people who are going to challenge you. That comes from all people and all different perspectives. It's really that mix. I also think in this space too, the only way we get to a better place is with allies and people who have maybe historically been in situations where they've been like, I feel I'm one of many, I feel great. And then you get to work with them and educate them on what your perspective is. And I've had fantastic allies and mentors in the past who have recognized what's happening to me and have stood behind me and course corrected behaviors on their team. And I think that's also a critical part of this. We can do stuff, but we can also help other folks create that dialogue. And if we want to do that, this isn't multi-generational, we're going to kickstart it. We have to find and create spaces where we can have those conversations and everyone comes along, which I think is a pretty critical part of the process as well.
Absolutely. And just so many little things that you kind of have to like chip away at across the board. Once in a while, you'll get one of those big initiatives that you can implement, but definitely a lot of little pebbles and sand.
Yeah. I wanted to, and I will end and wrap up, and then we'll have a little bit of Q&A. But you said something that was I think really important for other people in the space who are potentially considering founding and have a little bit of anxiety about leaning into being a woman founder, a diverse founder, and something that I've struggled with personally a lot. I'm a very private person actually, and rightfully for the business, right? There was like you want to, you're a woman founder, you're going to be out there, and it's going to be like, but I'm a founder. Like, can we just talk about how I'm a founder? I don't want to talk about how I'm a woman founder. This is not what makes me excited about the world. And I think it's a really real thing to grapple with, where we want to be in a space where I can just be a founder. You can just be a founder. But we are founders, and it's really important to figure out how we own that part of the conversation. And I thought it was just worth highlighting, because I don't think it's talked about a lot. I know it's not talked about a lot. You and I actually didn't even talk about it in our prep of like what that experience was like. But it was a hard one. And I imagine you and Mel did have conversations about it. Was there something that shifted for either of you or you personally, where you got more comfortable with it? Was it just where the business was? Was it, or are you still not comfortable with it? This is a curious,
I would say Mel, like, I mean, of course, so you're still growing with it. I think like one big thing that I think a lot of women leaders that I've talked to do struggle with is, the Hillary syndrome, where you have to be likable. There is an expectation and onus on you to be likable, which perhaps our male counterparts don't have so much as, and the threshold of likability is very high versus what's expected of someone who maybe is now a woman. So coming across as too short, too aggressive, to the point, even if if you do apples to apples, it's not really happening. So I think like we've been like a little bit cautious about, we were a little bit more cautious about that to begin with. I think but Mel has come leaps and bounds. I still struggle with it at times. But the other thing that we do talk about is, yes, we're founders, like we're people, we're humans, like we're people. But then like, even if you don't experience it yourself, right? Even if by the numbers you're doing well, I think like over time, at least for me, what's really jumped out is that just because it didn't directly happen to me, doesn't mean it's not happening. Yeah. And I think just every year the data that comes out just reaffirms that. And the truth is, we're here because of literally not one, but like a ton of other people who have actively spoken up about issues that all the way from getting the right to vote till today, right? Like you stand on the shoulders of giants. And so if you do have a platform, I do feel like there is, for whoever feels comfortable and authentically connected to an issue, to talk about it, because work and life are, especially now with remote being so normal, work and personal life, and where one ends and the other begins, is really, it's all one part of, it's all one thing. And we talk about this a lot, is like how you're not really bringing work Zari to work, you're bringing all of Zari to work. Yeah. So if I couldn't sleep last night, that's going to show up at work, right? If I had someone close to me pass away, that's going to show up. Things, and just like accepting humans in all their forms, and allowing other people to bring that, because the alternative is we're like founder, engineer, salesperson, but that's not really all they are. Yeah. And it's, we can call it that, just like we talk about unbiased reporting. But the truth is there's almost always a bias. And the most important thing is to be honest about what that bias is and what that identity is as a person. I don't know. That's just a lot of philosophy. I do think.
So I think if we showed up and said,
a lot of my stream of consciousness.
Here's a guidebook, Zari and Jen, we figured it out. You check these, like that would be the most ridiculous 51 minutes.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Wouldn't that be cool? I would, it will never happen, but I think if we were to try to put a bow on our philosophical wanderings, I loved this, which is, we're human. Can we create a space where you can be human at work and that is okay and it doesn't ding you? You get to be successful in that. And with that, bring the breadth of your experience to the team, to the culture of the company, to the product, if that's what you're delivering, whatever that is really, really, really powerful. I would say fostering is the start of things, right? And if Zari and I were honest about anything, it was that it's hard work. It's a work in progress. Things are still happening today that are really disappointing. And there are things that are happening today that are really exciting and they're happening all at once. So it's more of a exercise in listening, creating space to grow and creating space for those around you to grow and then thinking creatively about how do you approach different problems, especially around hiring and pipeline, of really test your assumptions of, am I doing this because I really think it's going to get me to the best result and best hire? Or am I doing this because this is how it's been done? And this is me pattern matching to a prior behavior or a set of behaviors that I've been taught. And those can have been successful, but they may not be the success that you want right now. So lots of work to be done on that.
On that note, yeah. We already have a question for you, Jen. So
I
a quick transition over. Jen, I love what you mentioned about psychological safety. Can either of you share a few ways we can work on building that muscle to encourage and strive for psychological safety? Curious both on a specific instance, convo level, and systemically at the company. Any tips?
Yeah, well, I'll attempt to start. I think the first thing that I've noticed is actually talking about it. Talking about it a lot is a really important part of this. And like I said, not seeing it as something that you achieve. And once you've achieved it, you never have to talk about it again. I also was raised in a house that, and I loved that I got to bring this language to work eventually, which was to not assume that you understand what's going on with the other person. So I think a lot of the things about work and things that can happen at work and psychological safety at work are, you start with this assumption of, well, this happened and this person was upset with me, attacking me, something was happening there. And that could be true. And that can be true. And it's true sometimes. And then sometimes there is this is how we're operating in this environment. We haven't found effective communication. So can we create a space where we can acknowledge, to your point, Zari, that people are human? And then can we create very specific spaces to have conversations and be honest about what those conversations are? I think one thing about safety is not surprised. It's coming into a room and saying, hey, the conversation we're about to have is X. Like, things aren't feeling good. They aren't working the way I want. And I'm going to come and assume that we can jointly get to a better space. That's a really hard ask. That's a really, really hard ask. I've asked people on my team to have those conversations where they're feeling frustration. And I've asked them to do the work to say, hey, I'll help prep, but you're going to really have to have that conversation in that space. And you know what, 99% of the time, it's a really respectful conversation. You have to walk in the room though, knowing that some percent, I'm going to call it 1, it's going to not be a great conversation. It's going to feel even worse. And as a leader who's asking the org to do that work, then it's my responsibility to be there if that's the outcome and support the team through that, support you as an individual, and then work through that issue. But what I have found is that if we can have it as a dialogue and we can create the space where people know they're going to have these conversations, we're excited to work together. We're all here for a reason, right? And we might have other things going on, and we're willing to say, hey, you know what? I wasn't my best self in that moment. I showed up terribly. Like, I hear you. Thank you for that feedback. And let me think about how I can work through that. But it's really just like active dialogue. And then knowing that sometimes like it's not going to work and that's okay. That's not a failure. That's actually this is something we really have to work on and work through, but kind of, showing up and challenging yourself as an organization to do that. And then as a leadership team, I think, I
absolutely.
Our leadership team too. So did you like think about how that landed? Do you want to like readjust that? Do we want to and I hope that people do it for me too, right? Did that work? That didn't work? Like, okay, cool. I'm open to that feedback. You know what? Like, I'm going to learn and grow too. And that's the best I can model. So sorry, I just rambled. What are your thoughts?
No. I was going to say, what is something that we've done? So I think one thing that we did earlier this year, I think, was if any of you have heard about the radical candor framework. That's something one of our advisors really brought up to me and Mel, because especially early on in our relationship, we were both very much into ruinous empathy, where we were not being fully authentically honest with each other. Or when we were authentically honest, it would, because we had been bottling it up, it would just sort of implode in sort of an unproductive way into obnoxious aggression. And really where you want to be, honestly, and thankfully it didn't have much, but where we really want to be is like in this radical candor quadrant, which is two things. One, the person who you're talking to knows that you care deeply, and two, you challenge them directly. You don't beat around the bush, which again, culturally can be very difficult, because in Pakistan, a lot of radical candor can come off as like super blunt and culturally inappropriate. The culture there is definitely not as direct as in the US. So really like socializing that, especially if you're in a global team, but in general, like socializing that I think has helped us, or at least helped us be able to reiterate and sort of like structuralize how to help people conceptualize how we're thinking about it, and be like, and use that term. And I've had people in meetings since then be like, hey, radical candor, I'm saying this because I care, but I'm going to say it, and use that as a framework. And honestly, like, we have to be the first people to like accept it and talk the talk and walk the walk, because if we then react obnoxiously to someone giving us candid feedback, we're actually, setting a bad example for the rest of the company. And I think that's super important. The other thing I've learned, just top of mind, just came to mind. This is a really good point. Psychological safety. One, founders work really, really, really hard because we have skin in the game. So many reasons, right? And like recently when I was sick, I felt almost compelled to keep working, keep showing up to meetings. And I think I realized at that point that what I do matters, in that I am subliminally telling people this is how I expect them to show up. And it is not at all how I expect. I would never expect a member of my team to show up to that meeting if I was sick. And so being able to see it from the larger perspective, I think that is something really important for leaders, for managers, for founders, everyone to like be aware of, is that at some point you have to apply it to yourself. Otherwise, otherwise you're basically creating an unsaid, unspoken assumption that you work when you're sick, right? And that's not that doesn't create psychological safety. So you may not be doing it intentionally, and you may say, hey, I would never expect anyone to do that. That's not the message you're sending. And to me, as like, an obsessive workaholic, that's actually been really, really good, a good framework for me to remember that, hey, this is not just about you. This is about how you show up for other people. And anyways, so that was one.
No, I think that's systemically at a company, you will not, there's no way to get there except modeling the behavior that you want. And that's, that's the reality, right? You model the behavior. And so that's something to think about all the time as leaders and as individuals in the team. I know we're basically up on time. So Zari, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time with me, and Denver Startup crew. Thank you for riding along with us on this winding philosophical conversation about diversity and inclusion in the STEM space. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.